Heather Binning hosts this week's guest, Faika El-Nagashi, founder of the Athena Forum. It's a European initiative for sex-based rights, democratic values and political courage. Faika explains the convoluted political structure within both the EU and the Council of Europe, and how influence from ideological fringe lobbyists and NGOs is prioritised, resulting in barriers to the recognition of sex-based rights.
Hello and good evening to everybody. Thank you for joining us from, I hope, what is your lovely warm homes. I'm very excited this evening to be talking to Faika El-Nagashi, who is a wealth of information. Sorry, I've got a bit of a throat thing. About all things Europe and all things LGBTQ plus Europe. So I'm really looking forward to her sharing some of her knowledge with us tonight. Welcome, Faika, to the Women's Rights Network Weekly Zoom.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here.
That's great. Now, to start, I don't want to put words in your mouth and read out an entry of who you are. So I'm going to leave that to you. Would you like, please, to introduce yourself, a little bit of your personal background? And you could go straight into your first. My first question is going to be, when did this all happen to you? When and how did you realize that something was wrong and needed to be done? And you were do it.
Yeah, and what did happen to me? I don't know. It's a bit like a car crash. Like you really have to. It takes time to recover from all of it. I think of myself as a lifelong human rights advocate. I started to do political work when I was quite young, when I was 19. A few years after I came out as a lesbian. I'm 49 now, so I've been doing political work for 30 years now. And I started very much exploring things about relating to my own identity. So as a lesbian woman, as a woman of color with a migrant background, and I got into youth activism on a European level. And I worked with youth organizations on issues from LGBT, it was then, to migrant women's rights, and really enjoyed doing that. And then I worked for a long time in the civil society sector. I worked with a migrant women's organization for 11 years, and then with some other NGOs, including with ILGA Europe, the main now LGBTIQ plus maybe organization in Europe. And then I started to work with the political party for the first time in my life, and that was the Greens. And then I became a politician with the Greens, and I've been doing that for 10 years. I had a political function, a mandate. I was member of Austrian Parliament here. And my mandate ended around this time a year ago. And by then I had spoken publicly and critically about gender identity. And so it's a bit difficult, to pin down when exactly did what exactly happen, but more or less around 2017. I was a politician by then. I was alerted by a friend to changes that had happened in this sector that I had not been following closely. So I had just been with this assumption that what we thought of as a community or as trans issues were exactly the same as they were 20 or 25 years ago. And this friend of mine from my youth activism days lived in the UK, or still lives in the UK, and had seen what was happening there and unfolding there and the discussions that were going on there. So none of this was happening at that time in Austria, and also not in the context that I was moving in. So we had a brief exchange about that, and that's when I started to look into it much deeper and did some research online. So when I was looking this up online, I came across lesbian women who were talking about this, like Julia Beck, for example, but also others. Annie O'Brien, I remember, in Australia, and other women throughout who were articulating very well and very clearly, Magdalene Burns, for example, also, what the issue was. And I was starting to get concerned. And by then I was active again, even as a politician, with a civil society organization that called itself Euro Central Asian Lesbian with an asterisk community. And I was on their board, and we were organizing conferences, lesbian conferences, and trying to build something like a lesbian movement. And we were having, or I was trying to have these discussions internally. So where is conflict? What does all of this mean? How can we be an organization for lesbian women and move around having these new identities pop up, like women identifying as non-binary, but also to have trans-identified men within the group. And I found that it was effectively impossible to change the course of the organization because of the, well, on one hand, the funding requirements or the funding opportunities that were there by big foundations that were supposed to fund women's projects and women's organizations, or even lesbian projects and lesbian organizations. And they were funding on the conditionality of being trans inclusive. Mm-hmm. So that was one big barrier. But the other one was also the accusation or the consequences of the accusation of being transphobic. So an organization could not really exist if it was accused of being transphobic. And it would already, I noticed that it would already go hand in hand with another accusation of being racist. And so if you wanted to evade that, then you would go down that route and include men who would say that they are women or lesbians. Mm-hmm. So I stopped working with this organization for a number of other reasons, unrelated. But then by 2022, I was really trying to find a way to address these issues and to also make use of the opportunities that my mandate, my political mandate, gave me. And I also saw that the issues now have arrived in my local context and in my national context. So that is when organizations began to change the terminology that they've used, that they were using, started to speak about menstruating people, use different words. And this term TERF came up that before did not exist in our context and that did not come from our German language. And so I started to address this first on social media, but then also quite publicly in a big interview, and then other interviews followed. And so from then on, I was heavily attacked from different sides. I was also then banned from attending a lesbian conference organized by the organization I've been active with before, had open letters against me by colleagues from my own party, by activists that I've worked with for years and decades, and also politicians from other parties. And it has been escalating since then. And so I've endured 3 years of that in my party with the Greens. And then this year there was a motion to expel me from the party brought forward by a trans-identified man. So I went through the whole process. Eventually I was not expelled, but then I decided I've had enough and I left my party quite publicly also. Mm-hmm. And so I'm quite happy that is behind me.
Good. You know, yeah. It's a story that we're not unfamiliar with. So many women have gone through, well, you know, understand the realization of what's happening around them, you know, and that can't be right. Surely that can't be. And then, but it is happening. This is wrong. And then for many who have stood up and spoken to suffer as you have, not just our Green politicians, and I'm sure not in where you are, not just Green politicians as well, but they do seem to be a particularly captured bunch, really. And I'm presuming the Green in Austria is the same as, well, very similar to the Greens here. So that led you to take the really brave step of setting up Athena. And I want to, when we move over to Vicky's questions, I'm going to put, or maybe somebody can while I'm talking, to put a link into your document that you've got on there, the big report that you've co-written, and it's quite a detailed explanation of how Europe got captured, and it's not a surprise to everybody. It's what we know. It's Yogyakarta, seems to be have been all ground zero for a lot of this stuff, and then gradually infiltrating and people moving about, responsible for one thing in one place and then another, and growing that way, tying in funding, and then all these bodies that are set up that get European funding, but also then use that funding to further lobby their own ends. We've seen it here, Stonewall. So when I was reading about ILGA, ILGA, which was, I'm presuming, was it the International Lesbian and Gay Association or something like that?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's now they kind of made me think of Stonewall. That's Europe's Stonewall, and there are others. Not just them. There are other groups as well, and so it's a fact. So I just wanted to point out to everybody there is a fabulous timeline in that document. If you don't want to read all the document, go to page 23. There's a really great timeline of how Europe got captured. So well done. It's a great document, and I see that our very own Maya Verstatter is she on your team of advisory council or something. So that's great. Good move. So some things, some of it was very frightening, very frightening. In Council of Europe, some department of the Council of Europe providing the training. And they seem to be almost departments of the government, the European government of the Union, that are doing this and training judiciary and the police. You're way behind. And do you want to discuss what might be interesting? The trans equality strategy for 2020 to 25. I don't know if you've got any other better sort of egregious examples of what Athena has set up to counter. That's really kind of what your objectives and how you're going to go about achieving them.
Yes, you've summarized this really well. These are exactly the main points of the report, and we wanted to do this exercise basically to show what has happened, but also really to make it clear where we are at now, because I think so many people do not realize this across Europe. And there are two main bodies. So one is the European Union and the other one is the Council of Europe. And the Council of Europe is a much broader geopolitical area. It's 46 countries. The UK is also part of the Council of Europe. And then there's the European Union. And there's money in both of it. And both are very powerful machineries. And so much has been happening in the past 15 years or so. And we would say more or less behind closed doors. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to really bring this to the surface and into daylight, because much of this does not do very well in daylight. Mm. And to really expose it for what it is. It is difficult to follow, and that's intentional also, because it uses, as it often does, academic language, activist language, but then also with these institutions, the bureaucratic jargon on top of it. So many people don't understand well, of course, what is a resolution of the European Parliament? What is a strategy by the European Commission? Which one is binding? What does it mean in effect? So we wanted to give people an advocacy tool with this report, but also to make this something that media can use to somehow get some orientation of where we are now when we start talking about these issues. And we're quite deep in it already. So there is maybe to address three aspects of this. One is the shift in language that has happened. So in many documents, we see that sex has been replaced with gender and conflated with gender to the point of then all of these documents get translated into the languages of the European Union. And not all languages differentiate even between sex and gender. They don't have two words for this. Mm-hmm. So it becomes complete confusion and a complete mess. Mm-hmm. Even from the beginning, the intention is not always fully clear. What is this used for now, in what context? And then you add gender identity to that is attached to sexual orientation and also completely conflated with that. And it becomes very unclear. So it has been used like this as a placeholder to mean something about women and women's rights and something about LGBTIQ+. We don't really know anymore, so we will just say queer. And then you will find in documents that when it is about hate speech, for example, they will then say anti-queer hate speech or queer phobia. Sometimes they will go and try and use the right acronym and will say LGBTIQ phobia. But I think even they themselves notice that they cannot make it right because the activist terms keep changing. Mm-hmm. And so you don't really know what to do. So then you will just use queer and you can pack anything under queer. And I think it's quite reckless to have official documents by very serious institutions that use language like this, terms that you cannot define these terms. Mm-hmm. So this is on one level, is the shift in language that has massive consequences for what it is that we're talking about, especially if it's also in documents about violence against women, about equality of men and women. And the idea from the activist side is to mainstream this. So at one point we had in the late 1990s, when gender was introduced as a concept by feminists to add a social dimension of power hierarchies and power relationships between men and women. And so to address these aspects, there was the approach to push for gender mainstreaming. So to look at how these power relations function in every field, in every policy field. And similar to this approach of gender mainstreaming, they are now trying to do basically gender identity mainstreaming. So to write it into every area and every aspect. Because once this idea got hold that you have to look at it everywhere, they are just using that idea and that agreement, that initial agreement, that it is something that has to be done thoroughly, and do it now with their new agenda point, which is trans or gender identity. So there is this shift in language. Then there is the immense amount of funding. So exactly as you say, there are 5 big lobby groups, trans activist groups, NGOs that get dozens of millions of euros in funding from the European Commission alone, but then also from other philanthropic foundations to advocate the institutions in their interest and to push their demands. And of course, they are very influential. They are not only well-funded, but they have opened doors to the institutions. And for years and for decades, they have been the only voices that have been heard. So they are the ones that get invited to consultations, to expert hearings, to round tables. And then when we look at the rest of the civil society sector on the European level, there's a vacuum. So there are other organizations that are set up to represent women and women's rights, but they are not vocal on this issue because they fear attacks by their brother and sister organizations. They fear defamation. They fear loss of funding. And they also fear internal conflict because they are membership-based member organizations throughout European countries. And the member organizations have different positions on this. So they would implode internally if they would take these topics on. And then the third aspect is what we call soft law. So not exactly legislation that is binding in any way, but through recommendations, through statements by very influential bodies of these institutions, the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Council of Europe, for example, who now is Michael O'Flaherty.
Or less said about him, the better at the moment. Yeah.
Or the Fundamental Rights Agency, which is the main human rights body of the European Union, and the research that they are doing, the analysis that they are doing. So basically the knowledge and the information that they are providing, and then the trainings. There's a whole unit at the Council of Europe that provides trainings to across Europe to administrative staff, to equality bodies, to the judiciary, to law enforcement. And in these trainings, they communicate this position as if it was binding, but also as if it was human rights consensus and basically the European position to have. So it is very difficult then for anybody to object, to be critical, because the accusation is not only that you are right-wing or far-right, or you're in the same corner with Putin and Trump and Orban, but also that you are anti-democratic and you're anti-European.
There's, I touched on a couple of things. Really that are moving on, but related to that. So I don't know if you've seen yet, but I've noticed here that just now to say that you fight or support women's rights is, well, there was a court case in Kent last year. Was earlier this year? Was it Harriet Haynes on the English Black Pool Ball Federation? Somebody will correct me. Apologies for getting that wrong. But under questioning, they were saying, to say that you're supporting women's rights is a transphobic dog whistle.
Yeah.
That also came up last week. Sarah Morrison's employment tribunal in Northern Ireland. And again, it came up that to say you're supporting women's rights obviously means that you're transphobic. It's kind of this is a kind of slightly new, they're going straight for that. We've been supporting and pushing women's rights for some centuries now. Unfortunately, we've had to. But kind of connected to that, and I don't know whether you see this as a good thing or a bad thing. So the Istanbul Convention, if members know, the Istanbul Convention is about, agreeing to put an end to violence against women and girls, basic that, shorthand, that lots of countries have signed up to. But I see that, was it Latvia's withdrawn from it, and others are less supportive because the language changed. In the drafting of it, the language was changed to allow an obfuscation between women and sex and gender. So presumably now the Istanbul Convention, we ought to be considering it's pushing this as well, because it's saying that men are subject to these rights. Will there be any? Is there going to be any backlash? I mean, if more and more countries do, it's quite interesting that some the countries that have pulled back from it. Do you think that might ultimately might that be a crunch time that might ultimately bring some sense to some people?
No, I don't think so. But also, it is not actually in the Istanbul Convention. It is the way that some want to interpret it. But they have, it's quite easy for them to interpret it in that way and to attach gender identity to what you have, and there is clear lobbying for that. So that's what they are trying to do. And you in the transposition, so in the way that you implement it into national law and legislation, once you start to fall into this trap of the of being unprecise with the language and the concepts and the terms that you use, and to not care about differentiating between sex and gender, you totally fall into that trap. And then you have the other trap of wanting to be inclusive and of wanting to put LGBTIQ into an issue that is about women and women's rights. And it's now for years, bureaucrats and politicians, but also women's rights advocates have been conditioned to want to do that and to look for it and to push for it. So it's like it's an automated response that they have almost. And then you have the lobby groups that are active, and they are actively pushing for it. So they are actively meeting with the politicians and lobbying them. And they are providing them with examples of legislation. So basically copy paste of laws that have been implemented in other countries. Malta is a good example for that in terms of their conversion therapy law, for example, or also their self-ID law. And it actually happens exactly on that level, that these national legislations serve as a blueprint for other countries that can be adapted a little bit and changed a little bit. But initially, politicians will have no idea what exactly to do and what exactly to implement. Somebody wants conversion therapy bans. Okay, so what exactly do you want? And then the NGOs will provide that to them. And the problem is that they often operate in such a vacuum that you do not even have a strong opposition or other side that will present you with their criticism or caution you about one aspect or another. And unfortunately, also the conservatives often don't put up much of a fight about these issues because they think they are niche. They are not worth the fight. It is also messy. It is too complicated. How can you even try and understand this whole subject when it is intentionally so conflated and made so confusing?
That's exactly. I mean, that's the Denton's playbook, isn't it? Let's confuse and let's slip it in. Amazing how many countries have ended up with laws when it's been slipped in under the radar. I've got one more before I hand over to Vicky, and we might. This is one of the things I'll want to talk to you at a later stage about. In Northern Ireland, we're facing a particular issue at the moment. I don't know if you've become aware of it or not, but because of Brexit, when UK left the European Union, there was the Brexit agreement. So Northern Ireland needs to abide by European law because of the Windsor Framework. So the Republic of Ireland, European law, rather than UK law and the Supreme Court judgment in the For Women Scotland case. And so we're challenging that at the moment, and we may be going to court, we don't know. But so tell me, am I right in believing that there actually is no law in Europe that any of these member states has to abide by?
In terms of self-ID?
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. So this is not within the competence of the European Union. So the European Union cannot mandate self-ID laws across the EU, but they would like to. They would like to, and they've made this crystal clear. So at the beginning, I mean, it was clear before even, but they just renewed that. At the beginning of October, the European Commission presented what they call the LGBTIQ plus equality strategy 2026 to 2030. So you can already hear the problem with this. The European Commission is presenting a strategy paper, which is basically a roadmap. It lays out their intentions for the next years that has an absolute trans activist terminology. So what would that even mean? LGBTIQ+. The previous strategy was called LGBTIQ strategy, which is bad enough. But now they've even added a plus to it. So at the press conference, the commissioner, the European Commissioner for Equality, Hajj Labib, presented with a straight face this trans activist paper. And the content is just as trans activist as is the name and the framing. They are very happy about it. They think, the lobby groups, the NGOs, who they see as trusted actors, are very happy about them doing this. So they applaud them and they flatter them that they are on the right side. They are on the good side. On the other side is the evil side. So they've made this a question of democracy versus dictatorship. And so they see themselves within a broader geopolitical and moral context on the right side, with no awareness at all about any conflicting interests or how completely unhinged the demands are that they are now taking on as a European institution that loses credibility by doing so. And so in this roadmap, they say that they commit to promoting self-ID across Europe without age restrictions. So though they cannot mandate it and have a binding law, a directive about it, they can promote it. And there are many ways to promote it. So what they suggest is to have best practices, exchange of best practices. So in practice, this will mean there will be a lot of resources for this, a lot of funding, money to bring in groups of experts from countries that have implemented self-ID, let's say Malta, for example, or Ireland, and exchange with others that are still struggling or do not yet have the political momentum to actually push for it now, but maybe after the next elections. So until then, they are preparing the ground for it. They are meeting with equality bodies, with the civil society sector, maybe also sometimes with politicians, administrative staff in governments. And they are exchanging so that then when the momentum is there, they can make the push. And also still, and that is the reality across Europe in many countries, you do not have an organized structure on the other side to equally push against it.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's what we're trying to do, isn't it? So I've got so much I could sit talking to you forever, but it's time. The audience members let's ask some of their questions. So Spotlight's going to change. I'll be back with you before we finish. Over to you, Vicky.
Okay, loads of questions. The first one, Faika, is what is it about you that allowed you to see what your colleagues couldn't? Where did your independence of thought come from?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I wouldn't want to, pride myself with having seen this easily or all along. I mean, the moment that made a difference to me was that it was a trusted friend talking to me. So it was somebody who I could listen to, and I did not easily discard what she said. Though I will admit I couldn't believe it. When she was talking to me, that was in 2017 in Austria, when she was talking to me about men in women's prisons, men in women's shelters, I couldn't believe it. But then I did my own research, and then I couldn't believe what I saw. I couldn't believe what I then discovered. And so I don't know, but I mean, I have a biography that doesn't, I mean, on one hand, draws me to group belonging, but on the other hand, makes it difficult for me to fully belong to a group. I don't have a simple identity. I was born in one country, in Hungary. I was raised in another, in Austria. My parents are Hungarian and Egyptian. So I feel belonging to many groups, but then again, not fully to any of them. And I was very lucky to have been able to do, for most part of my life professionally, that what I'm really passionate about. And I would follow this passion. That was what led me. And so had I made a career decision, I would never have spoken about this. But I don't care that much about my career, but about what I truly deeply believe and feel passionate about.
Great, thank you. There were a number of questions about why is it that Green parties here and in other countries are so wedded to the anti-science, anti-reality trans movement? What is it about the Greens that attracts them to that?
That's a very good question. I mean, it's a terrible state that they are in, not only because of this lack of scientific grounding or any real feminist analysis. I mean, most Green parties everywhere probably think of themselves as feminist, but there is no feminist analysis there. There is no feminism going on. And then we can see how they treat actual feminists. So what they have subscribed to at one point, because it's much easier, and that's political laziness, and that's all over the Greens, I think, is queer feminism. But queer feminism nowadays manifests as an influencer feminism. It's a social media feminism. And so I think it is, in general, a lack of ideology, a lack of ideological grounding and foundation to frame and analyze many of the things that are happening and are going on, and are new challenges in a way. And you're basically at the end of your analysis of the potential of your ideology to give you an understanding of the world. So what you then have is that you fall back onto a very simplistic understanding of the centrality of the individual. So the individual with individual autonomy, with individual self-determination is centered, and everything is then deducted from that. So this approach of the Greens that they have about self-determination, so the self-ID laws in German are called self-determination laws, is that you have the right to choose. It is framed with human rights language, but it's just a mimicry of human rights. You just use the same words, the word combination. But you say there is a human right to choose your sex. And so they just make it up and embed it in this framing because it sounds good to them. And they think that that is their position. That is what they should do and what they stand for. So there is absolutely no ideological foundation. But what I find even more worrying about the Greens is this highly dogmatic approach that makes them a totalitarian system. So it's very authoritarian. And for a party that wanted to be very aware of authoritarian dynamics and actually monitor them and criticize them and disrupt them, especially around fascism, and defines themselves as an anti-fascist movement, they are really reproducing this internally. And I'm not quite sure why it is, if it attracts that kind of people, if the Greens attract that kind of people with these strong tendencies underneath some nice title or heading, or if it is precisely because this focus on fascism that at the same time you're creating something that is mirroring it so strongly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. Leading on from that, is there a political party that you feel represents you? Many of us now in the UK feel that we're politically homeless. Do you feel politically homeless, or is there a party that represents you?
Oh, no. No, I don't think there's a party that represents me. I don't have the need anymore to have a party that represents me. So I remember before joining the Greens, I didn't know who to vote for. So that was already before joining the Greens. That was for other reasons maybe at that time. But I mean, I think it would be rare to find a party that you would, agree with on many issues for a long time. That would be rare. Maybe it was like that before, or you were just so subscribed to this idea of seeing yourself as a social democrat or as a green or as a conservative that you would accept so much of what your party would stand for, or feel inspired by their positions to take them on also. So I don't mind that there is not one party that stands for everything that I believe in, but it's a difficult question and decision when it's about voting.
Yeah, exactly. I think many of us face that decision as well. Somebody's question is, they say, I was always pro-EU, but I'm now scared of rejoining because of the EU forcing trans stuff onto us. Is rejoining a risk to women and same-sex attracted people here?
That's a very difficult question. I'm not able to answer that, but I can only say I am pro EU. I still am. Even after writing this report, I am still pro EU. But I was shocked when I wrote this report, and then everything that has unfolded since, even because they are not stopping. They're just putting one unbelievable thing on top of the next. What I'm really worried about is that the EU is destroying itself, the credibility of the institution, and I would love for it to come to its senses and to be useful, and deliver on the promise that is implicit in this European project. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it going to be, people are asking, what needs to happen to get the EU to change direction? How can it be reversed?
Well, I'm sure there are different strategies around this. The one that I am following and we're trying to do with Athena is to make this as public as possible. So to, as I said, bring it into daylight so that people know about it, that make it so that people can understand it, at least, as much as possible, translate it in a way so they can understand it and they can participate in discussions and debates around it. Because this is also a thoroughly anti-democratic process. By the way it is happening, that it's happening behind closed doors, but also by the way that any debate around it is also still shut down. It is labeled hateful and so on and so forth. Or as Hedda said in the beginning, if you would advocate for women's rights, it's a right-wing dog whistle suddenly. So this is what we're trying to do. So to breach the media silence around all of this that we still have in continental Europe very heavily, to speak publicly, to encourage others to speak publicly, to basically force them to speak about it. I would love to have a conversation with the Commissioner for Equality about the meaning of the LGBTIQ plus in the strategy, or whether she actually believes that self-ID without age limits is a good idea. So we want to force these conversations, and we want to confront them with it, and confront them with it to the point that we can also shame them on it. So it's not us who have to feel ashamed because they are putting us into some right-wing extremist field, but that we are rightly confronting them and asking them to justify themselves, because so far they've only received applause from the activists that they are trying to please.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And since setting up Athena, have you has it been popular? Have you got supporters? And have you got any press in countries across Europe about what you're doing?
We've had really good media reception. That was fantastic. I think a few things coincided. One was the presentation of the LGBTIQ plus equality strategy, because then there was a story for media to attach this to, and they need a story. So just to say we've launched a new organization might not have been enough. But so there was a good moment that gave us also momentum. And of course, we're telling a story. We're telling many stories. So one of the stories we're telling is mine, of course, but there are others also. And we also want to highlight them. But media reception has been very good, because so far also, there was a lack of the other position that they could quote. Now, when in the UK, when you have a case and you have media reporting, there are so many organizations and individuals who will speak from a critical position that media can turn to, or who will go to the media and will say, look, this is what we are saying about this. And for the European institutional context, we didn't have that. So nobody would give them a critical position. The European Women's Lobby, for example, an organization set up to advocate for the rights of women, would not comment on these issues. So now there is an organization. We're nonpartisan. We are not right-wing. Most of us come from the left. Many come from the Greens. So there is an option now. We also had some other smaller stories that broke around the same time that gave us good media traction and media reporting. And I'm giving interviews nonstop, basically. So that's been very good. And many journalists that I talk to can really relate to not only concerns and doubts about various aspects of this, the transitioning of children and adolescents, for example, but also women's rights. But what they can also relate to is how difficult it is for them to bring a story about this. And they're also fed up with this. They feel like they cannot do their work because they just cannot report about this as journalists and do their work properly. So that's what they've been telling me. And reception by people in the various countries has been great, really, really very, very good. So many people are enthusiastic about this, are motivated, are really happy to see something happen, that others took this initiative. And we're trying to have conversations in different countries with individuals and with groups that are active there. And there are so many groups that are active. There's a challenge for them often to formalize themselves, to even be legal entities, and then maybe also to keep motivated in a way. Because what I've seen is that in many European countries, what's happening in the UK is being followed very closely. So people in Austria, in Germany, in Hungary, in Switzerland, in Italy, in Spain will be able to tell you the details of every court case that's breaking in the UK, of every article that is being written in the UK. But then we focus there all the time. And we get motivated by the positive things that are happening. And then we get disheartened by the fallouts that we also see happening. And we forget to look at what's happening in our contexts. And we forget our own stories and our own battles in a way. And I understand why, because it's also somehow more comfortable, to watch what's unfolding elsewhere than to see the work that has to be done here.
Yeah.
And there are so many stories and so many individuals and so many names that are not known, that we don't even know almost of each other in our neighboring countries, of women who have lost their jobs, who have been dragged to court, who have been cancelled. And I think to turn towards each other and to become aware of each other, that's something that's a challenge, but also really exciting for us to do.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant, brilliant. Well, we're delighted that we can act as an inspiration, and we stand with the women of the EU, as Alex has just put in the chat. One thing, the last question before I hand back to Heather is, what can we do in the UK to support you? Are there ways in which we can influence the Council of Europe, for example? What are the concrete things that we could do?
Oh yes, I mean there are many ways. I think the first thing is to realize that the UK is part of the Council of Europe, so all of this is not happening completely detached from the UK. And then it's not so easy to influence the Council of Europe, but it is possible. You know, you have to find out who are your representatives there in the Parliamentary Assembly. So the Council of Europe has it's called PACE, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and you will have representatives there, and talk to them. There are resolutions that go through the Council of Europe Parliament Assembly. They are not binding, but they have symbolic weight. Who are those that are participating in the various working groups? It is so complex. There is so much of them, but you will have people who are sitting in there. And there's a Council of Ministers, for example. So who's your representative there? We hear that Kate Osborne is pushing for conversion therapy bans resolution in the Council of Europe at the beginning of next year. So they are preparing motions there also that will add weight. Because why did I start to look at the European level, or what motivated me? I saw, as a politician on the national level, I saw that with all of the ignorance and negligence and laziness that is prevalent among the politicians, what you have is that somebody, either a lobby group, an NGO, or some progressive politicians, bring forward an idea, a motion, a proposal for a law, and they reference the European level. And at that point, it's almost irrelevant what exactly it is that they reference. So they can reference a non-binding European Parliament resolution, but they put it in there and it gets weight. Mm-hmm. They can reference a statement by the Council of Europe, which is completely non-binding, but it will have weight. And so then if you have 10 references, it feels that the pressure is very real, as if we are lagging behind. This is something we have to do. This is something we should do. It's actually almost like there is no way out other than complying with it. So these things may not be binding, but they carry weight, and they will influence and impress your lawmakers, especially if they don't have a backbone and have no idea what this is about and what it actually is that they are doing.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand back to Heather for the last 4 minutes.
Thank you, Vicky.
Thanks, Vicky, and thanks everybody for your questions. What an interesting discussion. What an interesting guest you are. There's some love going for you in the chat. Everybody's thoroughly enjoyed this. My questions were mainly answered. So I just want to say, I hope that what we've done in the UK will help. We've certainly exposed it. We've forced conversations. We've brought it into the sunlight through court case and, a variety of means. Most of it has involved the courts, unfortunately, but, we are where we are. My hope is that the BBC now, they've been shamed into recognizing where they've gone wrong. I think the reach from the BBC will have really wide consequences, certainly in terms of other media across Europe, and that will only help your cause. It helps our cause further, because we're not out of the woods yet. We've got the Supreme Court judgment, but the people are trying to ignore it. So there is still a long fight for us, but, longer fight from you. And I hope that we can help. I'm hoping that you'll come back again and talk to us, and we can see what changes have happened. And also in the meantime, I'll be contacting you so that we can have some discussions about how we might be of more practical help to each other jointly in this. So Faika, I just want to say thank you very much indeed for spending time. And I know that you're going to rush off because you've got another recording to do. And I hope we haven't tired you out.
No, not at all. It was very invigorating and motivating. Thank you very much for the invitation. I really enjoyed being on. I will be happy to come back another time. And I'm sorry for the time limitation today. And for my very bad eyesight, because I would have loved to read the messages from the chat, but I can only read very little parts of it. But so thank you, but I could not.
We will send you a copy.
Further engage with that. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your interest and for your support. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Faika, for everything that you have done and are going to be doing.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and tap the bell to make sure you don't miss new content. Sign up to our newsletter at www.womensrights.network, and if you're interested in becoming a member, click on the Join Us link.